Consider supporting ArchaeoSoup on Patreon for as little as $1 per month. Link available in the video description. Thank you.
Where you get those papers? All those weavers, how they hypnotize. Where did you get those eyes? Where did you get
Hello and welcome back to another Archaeologist's Eye. In this series, I present you with a challenge, with an invitation to see the world as an archaeologist does, or certainly as this archaeologist does, as eccentric as I may well be. And out of that invitation normally comes a whole gamut, a whole smorgasbord of ideas and suggestions and perspectives that come out of the simple request, the simple notion of thinking, what does that remind me of? How does that relate to history? Last week I asked you to consider the Smart Sketcher, a toy which is a modern spin on a fairly long-standing toy concept. There were some of these around, I think, when I was a kid, where it projects an image, a predefined image, onto a drawing surface and enables a budding artist to draw fairly accurately, fairly quickly, and then get into the fun of colouring as well. And it's that notion, it's the projected light, I think, that was really top of my mind when I had an idea sparked, a historical notion came to mind after thinking about what initially I slightly dismissed as being a cheating way of drawing, actually was a fairly long-standing method. But we'll come back to that in a moment, because you guys did not disappoint. Starting with Kershaw, they suggested frescoes and hand-drawn animation films where different cells are used. It used to be sort of literally pieces of plastic overlain one on top of the other to create the effect of animation, 24 frames a second or thereabouts. And in that sense, theoretically, they say, every sketch you make and overpaint is a form of tracing art. And that's a very good point. And actually, you can have that progression of imagery, which is a subtle alteration of the tracing as you proceed. A little while ago I made a video about potentially the world's first GIF animation. I'll link to that at the end of this video. But that's a very similar notion, this sort of progression of subtly different and changing, progressing. It's a progression of imagery, a procession, I suppose, maybe. Very good point. That wasn't what occurred to me. They went on to say a bit more stretched in terms of interpretation would be full body tracing, as it were, and that is, for example, the Nascar Lines. And that's, I suppose, that's where literally a procession comes into it. The thought being that the Nascar geoglyphs, those giant, very, very famous pieces of massive artwork on the Nazca Plains, were actually drawn and redrawn by people processing and retracing their footsteps on the plain. So, sort of, potentially, although I suppose actually initially what you would have had would have been an act of drawing, potentially mapping out, and then tracing and retracing. But nonetheless, good thinking. I like it. John Armstrong said, the shadows on Plato's cave. Now, interestingly, the shadows on Plato's cave were an allegory. Well, actually, to be fair, he did suggest the right answer, but he also suggested the allegory that Plato wrote in his Republic, in his great work, The Republic, where he describes a group of people who have lived chained to the wall of a cave all their lives. I've lifted this straight from Wikipedia, facing a blank wall. The people watch the shadows projected on the wall from objects passing in front of a fire behind them and give the names to these shadows. The shadows are, therefore, the prisoner's reality, but not an accurate representation of the real world. Socrates went on to explain that a philosopher is like a prisoner who has been freed from the cave and comes to understand the hidden depths of reality, understanding that the shadows on the wall are not actually true, and through philosophy and through conversation and thinking and learning can perceive the higher levels of reality and ask questions thereof. This is quite a biggie, isn't it? I can see what the through thread was there, from a projected reality onto something which is not, in that sense, it's not real until it's been drawn. It's not permanent until it's been drawn, I suppose. And the projection, and also the projection of the shadows on the cave wall, I can see that definitely. And that's juicy, deep thinking. Not a million miles away from things like Schrodinger's cat, for example. And actually recently I was reading a New Scientist, which asked legitimately, what is reality outside of our perception? There's all these questions about the observed thing changing through the act of observance and so on and so forth. So deep thinking, and Plato and Socrates were definitely onto, or Socrates were definitely onto something, but that was not what came to mind for me. The cultural historian, Dr. RGST, said, well, they say that the artists traced, such as Thomas Akins, Vermeer, Norman Rockwell, and Maxfield Parrish, apparently all traced in some capacity to achieve the fine ends of their art. But he also goes on to say, by the way, I used to trace maps of Europe and make my own countries. That's fair enough, absolutely fair enough. And what a lovely little detail. I used to make my own, islands and also planets in their own little solar systems with friends when I was, well, who am I kidding? Actually, I did it a couple of years ago as well. But, when I was in school, I used to do that an awful lot. Chopsidy3 says, tracing a master drawing for transference by means of repeatable stencil seems basic to printing, metal and woodworking. In some instances, it's the most expedient way to preserve an original design for fabrication. Yeah, absolutely. Although that's a physical transposition from an original to a made thing, isn't it? I suppose that's not dissimilar to something like lost wax. Well, not lost wax, but mold making. Although actually no, lost wax would work actually, yeah. So various mold, where you have an original, you make a mold of the original thing, and then you use that mold to make a copy of the thing. That's not dissimilar to that. That's less similar, I would argue, to tracing. Perhaps, but good thinking. By the way, about 62 years ago, I had a device called a Magnijector. It projected images on the wall for viewing or tracing. It could also enlarge pictures for the same purpose. I loved that thing, he says, and then a great uncle borrowed it. People who borrow things and don't give them back. I never saw it again, and I'm still pissed. I'm sure the old geezer was at the gun club making targets with his buddies, yeah. I would still use it today. You simply place it on top of an object, photo or drawing, and the image was projected onto a wall. They may even still be around. Magnijector, interesting. So magnifying projector, I suppose, is what that's getting at. Nice, and also not dissimilar to the overhead projectors that we used to use in school. I remember, things like assembly. Someone would have a piece of what's it called? Piece of plastic, whatever, plastic sheet, and they'd write on that, and you could see them writing because it was backlit and then projected through the mirror onto the wall. Acetate, that's it, acetate. They were writing on acetate. No, they said acetone then. No, you can't write on acetone. Scaspia said, not sure if this is what you had in mind, but my previous career as a commercial illustrator saw me using a camera Lucidia, or Lucidia, I'm guessing Lucidia, to trace text onto my designs. And I've got in brackets here from the internet. The camera Lucidia performs an optical superimposition of the subject being viewed upon the surface upon which the artist is drawing. Now that sounds as though that's a U-shaped projection, as opposed to sort of being like an L, where it's something here that's being projected onto the wall. That seems to almost be like a projection from subject to blank medium, I suppose. That's an interesting one. Very, very close, but not quite what I was thinking in the historical context. But I'm learning an awful lot about optics here. I don't know about you, but I certainly am. Hibaru-san says, only someone who can draw would think that everyone can draw. I can drag a pen or a pencil across the paper, but the result looks awful and nothing like my intention. Now, in fairness, what I mean when I say anyone can draw, and I think anyone can improve their standard for a start. I think that's true. With practice comes improvement. I don't think anyone can be a Picasso level draftsman. I don't know if you know, but Picasso, when he wasn't doing surreal and cubist type paintings, he was actually an astonishingly accurate drawer. He could do photorealism, and then he went on to break the rules to make better art. I'm not suggesting that, because I'm not a photoreal drawer, but it's more just the case of anyone can make a mark on paper, on pencil, on heck, everyone seemingly can make a mark on walls, for graffiti purposes. So everyone can draw. They just can. Everyone with the right means, given the means, can make a mark on paper. It's just a matter of practice from then on, and then intentionality and meaning and the ability to go on from that point. So that's what I'm getting at. But I take your point. But also at the same time, I'm not just being. I'm not just forgetting my privilege, as they say there. I recognise I am quite good. I've always been quite good at drawing, but at the same time, I've never really properly, seriously practiced in the last 12 years or so. Anyway, Hibaru-san goes on to say, archaeologically, this device reminds me of Romans commissioning bronze copies of Greek marble statues. Not literal tracing, he says, but an attempt to reproduce an existing form, or perhaps another instance might be making a rubbing of a carving. And that's a very good point. The Romans absolutely copied a lot, especially Caesar Augustus himself brought in an awful lot of change when it came to Roman statuary. There were shifts in the Roman attitude towards, for example, having increasingly naked or nude forms in sculpture. It became fashionable. It became something that they wanted to have. But also shipping marble and shipping, for example, cast bronze, this kind of thing, is expensive. So it's easier to maybe make a version in another form. So, for example, in this instance, bronze copies of a Greek marble statue might be maybe a hollow bronze statue or some sort of other malleable form that they can copy, ship over back to Rome or back to another part of the empire in another form, and then reproduce that in perhaps marble or in maybe even a cast material if needs be. So yeah, absolutely. That's again another great thought, another little historical tidbit there that's come out of simply asking the question, what do you think? What on earth has this archaeologist thought about that? Obviously, the answer, and a great many of you got this almost instantly. This hasn't been the hardest archaeologist's eye ever. It's been a bit of fun though, certainly for me. The answer was camera obscura. Yeah. So John, Chris, Ron, Dr. RGST, Let the Tunes Flow, Keith and Nolan, you all got that answer correct. Camera obscura. And the camera obscura has been around since at least 500 BC or BCE, though and I think it's likely that it may have had prehistoric precursors, because we know at places like, for example, the Boyne Valley tombs in Ireland, that people absolutely knew about light and projected light, and in that sense vectors of light. They knew where the light was coming from, they knew which way it was traveling. They used it in the case of solstices, lighting up the inside of tombs. It wouldn't take much to then make shadows, and then to think, oh, I can trace that shadow onto another surface. So I think this technology is probably as old as the cave, as old as it were, Plato's cave and shadows being projected on the wall. A camera obscura, or in plural, camerae obscurae, apparently, is from the Latin word camera obscura, meaning dark chamber. Obscura, dark camera chamber. It's a darkened room with a small hole or lens at one side through which an image is projected onto a surface opposite the hole. Now that can be the wall, so sometimes portable versions of a camera obscura might be a tent out in the field, projecting the bright Tuscan landscape perhaps through a hole in the tent wall onto the wall opposite, or maybe onto a canvas that had been set up there, maybe onto a table perhaps that had something angled in order to receive that imagery. The introduction of a lens into this process may well have taken off in the 16th century, the late 16th century, and became very popular with artists who had access to this technology, and who can blame them for taking advantage of it. It is a brilliant way of creating an ever more accurate drawing or painting of a subject, and obviously would be developed into the photographic camera, which is absolutely another artistic pursuit to this day. So artists used projection then, but also artists still projected in all sorts of forms. There are installations that project art, and cameras in particular are a microcosm of the camera obscura. It's just something which is portable. The concept was developed further into what we would call a photographic camera in the beginning of the 19th century, when camera obscura boxes were used to expose light-sensitive materials to a projected image. Thomas Wedgwood is believed to have been the first person to have thought of creating permanent pictures automatically, in that sense, by capturing images on material coated in light-sensitive chemicals. It's a fascinating progression that may well go all the way back to the very beginning of humans observing shadows. You know, it's a brilliant thing. Just one more note here: the camera obscura has been used as a way of studying eclipses. It's a great way of mitigating the risk of staring directly at the sun and damaging your eyes if you're interested in the movement of heavenly bodies. And it's also it's important to stress that by projecting the image onto a surface, first of all, you have this interesting effect where the image is actually turned upside down, much like as it is inside our eyeballs. Light enters and hits the sensor, so from the top it hits at the bottom, from the bottom it hits at the top. So you have that going on, but also it preserves perspective, which is something that lots of artists struggle with, to get that accurate, proper disappearing point in a painting or in an image, in a drawing, in a sketch, or whatever, and to preserve that, especially if you're aiming for something which is what we might call today photo real, at a time before photographs. Then actually the camera obscura, I suppose just being a hand-drawn version of a photograph, technically, was a great way of achieving that goal. And there we have it. Thank you guys so much for these wonderful answers, this fantastic conversation, and a bit of seasonal fun. Camera obscura isn't cheating. It's not cheating, and I suppose neither is the smart sketcher. Thank you guys for watching. Hopefully you've enjoyed this. Until next time, do take care. Bye bye.